Hey, welcome once again to my channel. And today I'll be discussing my trip to Uganda in Eastern Africa. Three things motivated my visit to this country, and the first of them was to see the Entebbe Airport terminal that the Israeli Commandos attacked on the Operation Thunderbolt, which happened in July 4, 1976. And the second was to visit the source of the Nile, which is located at Jinja in the eastern part of Uganda. And then the final was to visit the location of the imaginary equator line which divides the world into two equal halves. So these were the two reasons why I decided to pay this visit. So I left Nairobi to Entebbe. So I'll give a little bit background about the Israeli invasion. The Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine in the 76 had hijacked an Air France aircraft that was flying passengers from Tel Aviv to Paris. It had some 90-something Jews in it. These Jews were taken as hostages and they were left at an old airport terminal building at that Entebbe Airport. So the hijackers wanted some of the Palestinian prisoners in Israel to be released. The Israeli government attempted to negotiate, but it eventually did not work. So at the failure of this negotiation, Israel had no option but to embark on this operation that they called Operation Thunderbolt, which was aimed at rescuing the Israelis in Uganda. So this operation required them to fly to Uganda to rescue the hostages. And then Israel being 4,000 kilometers from Uganda where the hostages were, they needed a place where they could fuel and then launch the attack from. So eventually, after several negotiations, Kenya agreed to provide them with landing and refueling permits for this operation. See, my movement was all planned, orchestrated around Kenya. We left Nairobi the same fashion these Israeli commandos left for this their mission that they carried out long ago. So we flew across the Lake Victoria. The Lake Victoria was one of the places that they dropped the commandos that now had to go on foot to put airport lights for the planes to land for the operation to be carried out. And then something very remarkable about this mission was that same July 4 that the rescue operation happened to coincide with the 200th anniversary of the US independence. So many Americans and Jews alike believed the operation was identical to the independence of the United States. The invasion and the operation was successful. Of course, Israel lost a soldier actually, and four of the hostages were killed, and then 7 hostage takers were also killed. Uganda lost like 20 soldiers, and then they lost some of their air force. Arrival at Entebbe, which, of course, Entebbe in the local language means a seat or a place where power rests. Though I did not see this exact airport terminal building, okay, but I saw a location where there used to be an airport before, but I didn't really go in to check. So I had to just leave the airport in a hurry because I planned to get to Jinja to explore the Nile before I come back to Entebbe to continue my tours. Leaving the airport, taxi fares from Entebbe Airport to Kampala is around 80,000 to 150,000 Ugandan shillings. There are cheaper taxis that come in there to drop people, so you can just ask someone at the airport, any of the people selling things at the airport, to show you where you could get cheaper taxis. So fortunately for me, I was able to negotiate a cheaper shared taxi for 5,000 shillings. So on arriving Kampala, it was a very big, busy city. There's one thing about Kampala, they have this thing they call border or motorbikes. That's like in Nigeria here, people call it Okada. Those guys are too rough, so just be very careful with them if you happen or you want to use one of them. So the same taxi driver that got me to Kampala just walked me to a park where I could get a vehicle to Jinja. And then, of course, the transport cost to Jinja is 5,000 shillings from Kampala. So on the road to Jinja, it was not different from what I saw from Entebbe to Kampala. The country is in the rainforest, and then it has lots of very, very green vegetation. There were a lot to see on the road. I recall that would be my first time of seeing a sugar processing company in my life, of course, in Uganda. Sugar happens to, by the way, be one of the most valued exports in Uganda. So another thing of interest I got to see on our approach to Jinja was the Nile Bridge. We call it the Jinja Bridge. So it was constructed by a Japanese firm for a whopping sum of 112 million US dollars. So this bridge was just too close to where I was to stop. It was one of the things I actually hoped I was going to see. So, and then of course, assuming you are an adventurer like myself, who maybe most times I don't have a prior reservation for a hotel, what I do is when I get to a place, I would now, depending on what I see and what I hear, and cost, I decide on where I'm going to stay. So if you're like that, I will advise you that when you arrive to Jinja, you can get a boda and ask the boda to drive you to any hotel or guest house around the Lake Victoria, and bear in mind that he should not charge you anything more than 500 shillings. For me, fortunately, I had a friend that gave me the contact of a tour guide. So the tour guide helped me to get a place, they call it Roses Inn, and it was at 5,000 shillings, which was fair. It was like $12 approximately. So after settling down, I went out to have a taste of local Ugandan dish. I had rice, pepper soup, and fried fish, and then there's one juice they call the passion juice, and I recommend it for anybody that visits Uganda, And
Nile Bridge fish and rice.
Yeah, thank you. I like your food. Very, very nice.
It's very nice.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I hope to come back to Jinja again very, very soon. My baby. Nice.
And down there at the hotel, I was told that I could actually go to Lake Victoria, that same day. Of course, I've agreed with my tour guide that I will be going the next day to visit Lake Victoria and the Nile. But he told me I can go that same day, which I was like, oh, that would be wonderful. So, of course, I paid the 10,000 shilling entrance fee, and then I also paid another 5,000 for a boat ride. So, in the local language, the River Nile is called Omuga Kiyira. The water flows from this particular eastern bank, and then flows all the way, passing Ethiopia, passing Sudan, before it arrives Egypt, and then empties into the Mediterranean. So on the average, it takes the water 3 months to complete the journey from this place in Uganda to the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, it's more than 4,000 miles. So sailing that night was very interesting. Of course, I couldn't take much pictures because it's dark. So after that, we went back home, and then the next morning we had to go back to tour Lake Victoria this time. And our tour guide is a man called Joe. He had some tourist clients from the United Kingdom. So the tourists were 3 in number, and Joe introduced me to them as a tour guide from Nigeria. Coming on board the boat, I noticed they had probably made a booking for just them, but Joe wanted me to take advantage of the opportunity to explore with them, and it was a gesture I was very, very grateful for. Of course, I gifted him 20,000 shillings for the kindness. The Nalupale, or Lake Victoria, which translates to small gods or rocks in Ugandan language, is one of the African Great Lakes. So the lake receives like 80% of its freshwater supply from rainfall. Then there are other additional sources of water, which includes rivers and thousands of small streams. And all this empties to the Lake Victoria, and Lake Victoria drains the water in it to the River Nile. So it is very dangerous to sail the Lake Victoria in June, July, August. Strong winds and cyclones causes poor visibility and thunderstorms. And these strong waves pushes the boat towards some rock on the islands within the lake. And this can be very, very harmful or disastrous. It can cause the boat to capsize or such things. So in the case of an emergency in such a boat, one would assume it's better to stay close or to move towards the shores, but the local fishermen think otherwise. They advise it's better to sail into the lake when such waves get very, very, very difficult, because They believe that the wave effect is lesser in the center than on the shores. So what they advise you to do is just disengage the gears and then switch off the engines. And this will allow the boat to come to stop, so that it doesn't get very, very dangerous. So leaving the Lake Victoria, we traveled to Kikondo. Okay, so there's a very small fishing village across the Lake Victoria. The people here were mostly fishermen, farmers, and boat makers. So it was told that most of the young men preferred to become fishermen than going to school. So this is because they argue that they make money going fishing, and that going to school takes a longer time for one to become economically sound. The girls, on the other hand, to process these fishes that their male counterparts catch at night, and they sell them at the local market. Every nook and cranny of this village was littered with this little silver fish. So they call it ukene. Of course, I never got to eat it, but I was told it's very, very healthy. So after that, we toured the local fishing village on foot. The villagers were kind and nice. Children were very excited to see us, especially one of us, Chris. Chris had a very long beard. Even some adults at a point requested for his permission to touch his beard.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, you're playing good music, alright? Good. Bye bye.
So we finished our tour around 2 o'clock that afternoon. So I decided it was time to visit a place called Kayabwe in the Mpigi district. So this particular place is close to the Rwanda border, and the Equator passes through this. Equator, like most of us know, is an imaginary line that divides the earth into two equal halves. So you have the southern hemisphere down and the northern hemisphere up. So the equator line is just the center of these two hemispheres. So even though I arrived late, there were no tourists to see around this place, but there's some tourist centers like restaurants and so on and so forth. We are open to visitors. So let me talk a little bit about the equator. So the equator, like I said earlier, is that imaginary line that is drawn through the earth and is imagined to divide the earth into two equal halves. So it's halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole, and is referred to as latitude 0 degrees. So the equator divides the planet into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. This equator line passes through 11 countries, because Ecuador, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, some other places in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So countries and regions around the equator have lots of sunlight all year round. They have humid weather, and ideally should have equal hours of daylight and night. They do not experience the four seasons of autumn, spring, winter, and summer. And there are a few myths that people believe in about the equator. So I'll share 3 of those. And the first one is that people believe that the equator is fixed, and this is not true. So as you can see, this yellow line that is drawn here now, people believe that it divides the world into two equal halves, but the actual truth is that this particular line is meant to drift every year. So to actually get the estimation of where this line should be, one should use a compass to actually determine where exactly the 0 degrees of the equator is. So another thing people assume about the equator is that the country called Equatorial Guinea, people assume this country is on the equator, and of course Equatorial Guinea is not on the equator. In fact, none of the territories of this country is found on the equator. So that's another myth. So the third myth is about equator experiment. So this is an experiment done by tour guides to demonstrate that water takes clockwise or anti-clockwise direction when draining on either the southern or northern hemisphere. Even though it's a fact and true, they apply tricks to get things to work. This phenomenon of forming a clockwise or anti-clockwise vortex, which happens in fluids while drained on Earth's surface, is referred to as Coriolis effect. It's very possible to observe this in places located closer to the poles than on the equator. For example, Texas in the northern hemisphere and Buenos Aires in the southern hemisphere. It's more visible in natural phenomena like ocean currents and winds, and not in two poles on the equator. So after my visit to this place, I got back to Entebbe around 11 o'clock in the course, I was initially tempted to sleep over in Kampala, but the thought of missing my 7 o'clock flight back to Nairobi made me get back to Entebbe that night. So I flew back safely to Nairobi, just like Jewish commandos did after the rescue mission, before they finally returned to Israel. So that's my story of my visit to Uganda, and I will encourage you to visit anytime you have the time. And I want to thank you once again for joining me on this episode. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe if you've not subscribed. Thank you.